An intimate note to the sincere seeker. June 19, 1996. Somewhere in British Columbia, Canada. Note 54. When we are joyful. When we are joyful, we don't look for perfection. If you are looking for perfection, then you are not at the source of joy. Perfection hides imperfections, shows off. The world appears imperfect on the surface, but underneath, all is perfect. The wise will not dwell on the surface, but will probe into the depth. Things are not blurred, your vision is blurred. Infinite actions exist in the wholeness of consciousness, and yet consciousness remains perfect and untouched. As satsangis, realize this now and be at home. Joy is the realization that there is no vacation from wisdom. Newsflash from BBC, beautiful British Columbia. The Art of Living Circus has come to town, exclaimed at Chicago organizers as a gaggle of giggling devotees gathered from the Midwest. People were seen driving in circles, skipping sleep, and of course, laughing with Gurudev, our sit-down comedian. We rushed on to Portland. Dean says we have all become Russians instead of Americans, Indians and Canadians. At the old church, every inch of space was occupied. There was no place to even stand. The sight of the Master put a smile on every face. In Vancouver, the Aboriginal people warmly hosted Gurudev at the University of British Columbia. The sky, the sea, the snow-capped mountains, the tall trees and the waterfalls all seemed to whisper knowledge. Sudarshana left the room for 5 minutes and returned asking, "What did I miss?" Mercy said, "Enlightenment." Healing experience. There were many reporting healings recently. In St. Louis, a man presented a dozen red roses to Gurudev while tears of gratitude rolled down everyone's cheeks. His wife retells the story. "My husband Mike had never been one to complain about physical aches and pains in all our 24 years of marriage. He will go to work no matter how ill he is. I have seen him endure pulled muscles, fever, flu, chronic arthritis, and an abscessed tooth without taking pain medication. So when he began complaining about his shoulder, I knew it was serious." A trip to our family doctor resulted in an appointment with a neurologist. The MRI showed damage to nerves and muscles. The diagnosis after X-rays was a rotator cuff. Surgery was scheduled for June 13 at 10 a.m. We received a flyer in the mail about a lecture and meditation with Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, scheduled for June 12th. We thought it would be a good way to spend the evening just before the surgery. Many of the things we heard during the talk sounded familiar. Gurudev's voice even sounded familiar. We felt a real need to speak to Gurudev, and despite a line that seemed to be 300 people long, we took our place. Mike is usually not too patient, and since he was in pain, I can't still explain why we stood there to meet someone we would probably never see again. And what do you say to a holy man you know nothing about? "Nice to meet you. How are you?" With so many people, would he even care about two more? After saying hello, I found myself asking him for my husband's safety during the next day's surgery. Embarrassed by making such a request, To a complete stranger, I returned to my seat. Gurudev turned to someone behind him and asked for a rose. He handed it to Mike and said to keep the rose by his side during the night and all will be well. On the way home, we discussed the whole evening and decided that the rose was a sweet gesture, that Gurudev was a nice man. How our perception would grow over the last few days. The next day, Mike checked into the hospital. Our doctor said the routine surgery would take about an hour. 20 minutes later, I looked up and saw him motioning for me. He had such an old look on his face. I asked if he had just killed Mike, since not enough time had elapsed to complete the procedure. He took off his head and said, I can't explain what happened. When we cut into Mike's shoulder, we found no tear. I checked the MRI twice. It's on the MRI, but he doesn't have it now. My assistant is closing now. The next morning it dawned on us that the holy man had healed Mike's shoulder. We called Martina Borgio at the Art of Living Center in St. Louis, where Gurudev was staying. We got directions and off we went. Arriving at Martina's, kind people helped me to get Mike settled in a chair while we waited for Gurudev, whose presence I felt even before he entered the room. Thankfully, Mike was able to tell his story as I was too overwhelmed to speak. Gurudev asked only 2 questions about my husband. All is well? And after Mike's story, what is an MRI? Someone explained an MRI and Gurudev's response was, oh, there is a machine that makes a picture of what I can see. Kathy Champion.